Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, ad nastana. It's a pleasure to be back here with you on Points of Light Radio. And this is one of those segments that I'm really looking forward to bringing with you. We're going to be retracing our steps a little bit, as well as meeting with some old friends from our past. We're going to be having some of them back on here on Points of Light Radio. And our topic for this particular segment is going to be, what is the ideal candidate for your lodge? Now, with some of the more sectarian, shall we say, organizations, the ideal candidate, some of that question is obvious. And even when in the non-sectarian organizations that we featured here, parts of what you'll be looking for are fairly obvious. Age, for instance, the gender of the person, and so on. But in some cases, it's not as obvious as we think. There are questions we need to be asking. Now, if you recall, in the June 18th, 2023 segment of Points of Light Radio, we fellowshipped with Sir Knight Shear. He was the keeper of the flame for the Independent Order of Knights of the Temple. I asked him the following question.
Now, to become a knight, a true knight, you have to have a calling from God, and then you have to go through the rituals of set forth by the Grand Master of the order.
So, a calling from God. Now, you talked about how you got your calling. Okay. There's many ways to receive a call from what you're telling me. So, someone might come up to you and just tell you. But could these callings come not through, shall we say, come through? Like, prime example, we've talked before, Paul got his calling, the Apostle Paul got the Macedonian call to go preach in Macedonia in a dream. Right. So are you willing to accept the fact that not everybody gets their calling the same way?
Oh, yes. Like it isn't how they get it, it's the fact that it is a calling. Versus, I just got an interest in it. You can tell if somebody has a calling, a burning desire, versus, I just want to wear the pretty white outfit. Put a mark on their sleeve as something accomplished. Because
if someone come walking up to you right now and said, you know what, I had a dream last night, or I heard a voice last night when I was praying, you wouldn't necessarily just go with that. You'd probably want a little more.
Oh yeah, I go into a lot of questions, and I get redundant questions asked the same different way, the same thing different way, and you get the same answer. Then you know what's going on. There's a lot of safeguards because I'm the prior of the order, and I'm one of the last ones in line as far as accepting the men, because the Grand Master is above me.
Now, that's what got me thinking about this segment. What are we looking for in that ideal candidate? What does your organization look for in the ideal candidate? Well, we are going to have multiple guests on this particular segment drop by and visit us, and perhaps maybe if you're on the team that does the initial assessment of candidates, perhaps this particular segment might give you some fresh thinking and new ideas, or something to add, shall we say, to your list of questions. But like I said, you always hear me say, I can't wait to get started on this segment, because this is going to be very, very interesting. But as I always ask you, Are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Well, then you just trim your lamp and follow me. So, from a historical standpoint, how have people been selected for organizations and for services of different kinds? A good place to start is with some biblical references. So, Israel was looking for its first king, and the Samuel was chosen. The judge named Samuel was chosen to select one, and God told him to go to a gentleman named Benjamin. So it says in 1 Samuel 9:1, now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abel, the son of Zehor, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people, or taller. So this man personified a king, big, strong, tall, right? From all intents and purposes, right? A leader, someone that others would follow. But here's the thing. Saul didn't work out as king. He didn't know how to follow God's orders, and eventually, he failed in his kingly duties, and Samuel would turn his back on him, and he would be told by God to go look for a new king. Moving on to 1 Samuel 16, and the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing as I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? And fill thine horn with oil, and go, I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among them. So Samuel goes to Bethlehem, and he calls Jesse and his sons to a feast and sacrifice. And Jesse had a big family of boys there, so it says in verse 6, and it came to pass when they were come that he looked at Eliab, so this is Jesse's son, and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. Now I want you to remember this verse here, verse 7, but the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, see, that didn't work out before with Saul, or on his height of his stature, because I have refused him. See, it didn't work out before with Saul. And I want you to remember this, for the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart, right? So pretty much all of Jesse's sons walk in front of Samuel, and God rejects them all. But eventually, moving down here in the scriptures, he found out that Jesse had a son named David in the fields. So they went and they brought him in. It says they brought him in. Now he was ruddy, so probably gangly, young teeny bopper, right? And withal of beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him. So unlike Saul, this guy is kind of scrawny, shall we say, maybe even kind of, that ruddy, not fully developed features of a young guy. Didn't really look the part of a king, but God told Samuel to anoint him as king. Now moving forward in scriptures, in the Acts of the Apostles, now this is after Jesus was risen and gone to heaven, and if you recall, Judas betrayed Jesus and killed himself afterwards, and the apostles were looking to replace him. And the Bible says that eventually they made a choice. They had a choice between two of the followers, and they appointed Joseph and called Barsabas, who was surnamed Justus, and Matthias. Then it says they prayed, and then moving down to verse 6, it says they gave forth their lots. So almost like, in some of these lodges, the way we vote, they gave their lots, and the lot fell upon Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles. Now, moving forward, eventually, when you move to Acts 6, it says that, there was the number of followers, right, had increased. It says, in those days, the number of the disciples was multiplied, and there arose a murmuring of the Grecians and against the Hebrews because their wives were neglected in the daily ministration. So some of the logisticals and administrative issues, that were created here by the increased number of disciples, right? People were being left out. So here it says that the apostles told the other disciples, therefore, brethren, look out among yourselves 7 men of honest report, full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. Right? Moving down, it's to verse 5, it says, and the saying pleased the multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Ghost, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch, whom they set before the apostles, and when they had prayed, they laid their hands on them. So what's my point here? Okay, why did I use those scriptural references? Well, because you can see when people, now don't get me wrong, when you're choosing a king, you're choosing some bit, I don't like to equate the two too closely, but when you're choosing a king, they wanted to get it right. Now, if you look, when they chose Saul, he looked like a king, but he didn't work out, right? But even going forward, when the apostles were looking to further their work, they did, or first of all, to fill Judas's spot, they didn't want to just choose anybody, It was done with a lot of prayer and introspection, right? And even when they wanted to choose people, shall we say, for non-ministerial roles, shall we say, furthering the gospel, right? They chose people to do when they were choosing people, these 7 men to do their administration and logistical work. Even there, they just didn't choose them haphazardly. It was done prayerfully. It was done with a lot of thought. And I think that's important. That's important. So when we are looking at candidates for our lodges, clubs, so on, right? How are we supposed to do that? And how, right? And how are we supposed to select them? Well, let's move forward and see how some of our brothers and sisters in the various different orders make that happen. Well, where are we going to go first? Well, the first opinion we are going to seek here comes from my new friend, Alim Alday. He's the Supreme Grand Commander of the ancient Free Moorish Rite of Freemasonry. I will also tell you that this may be the first time, but not the last time you're going to see him here on Points of Light Radio. But let's see what he feels we need to look for, or his organization needs to look for, in that ideal candidate. Okay. Now, One question I wanted to know, what does the Moorish Rite look for in the ideal candidate? What would you say you're looking for in that ideal candidate?
Great question. I'll put it to the floor and I'll follow up if necessary. Stan,
Sure.
let's go to the floor. Anybody? I'll give a few seconds. What we look for, our model, Stan, in Freemasonry is, it's universal, is that on the male side at least, we are looking for good men and we want to make good men better men. As we make good men better men make a better world. And that's what we look for. That's the first thing. That's the first qualification that we look for. And that's a qualification that cannot be on paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's a qualification that has to be imbibed, observed. And
So
that's it. That's what we look for.
It wouldn't be something you would say, like one interview with this with a prospective candidate. You'd probably want a series of interviews, or even have them come around the lodge for a little bit and sit with everybody.
Oh, certainly. That's my method.
I like
That's my method. I gotta kind of get used to you. I gotta, you may not know that I'm observing you in that way, whether we're having, Zoom calls or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to hear from you and see you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I can discern, I'm sure others maybe have the same method, but that's how I can discern that this is a good man that I'm talking to, that I'm seeing, that I'm interfacing with.
Mm-hmm. The next opinion comes from my new friend, Darren Rose. You may recall him from our March 31st segment of Points of Light Radio, where he shed some light on the Egyptian Masonic order. So let's see who he feels is the ideal candidate for the Egyptian Masonic order. I think the question I wanted to ask you was, what did the Egyptian Rite look for in the ideal candidate, shall we say, for admission to your rite? What would you look for?
Okay. As a personal quality, we'd look for someone who has a deep abiding interest in Hermeticism and the Egyptian mysteries in general. So somebody who's very mystically inclined, who is interested in astrology and things like that, as well as Masonry. They have to be committed to Masonry as well, and the idea of Masonry. They have to be over 21 to join. They have to be politically moderate and be happy sitting in a lodge with different kinds of people, including different genders. So we have men and women in our lodge as well. And they have to be somebody who feels drawn to an esoteric approach to things, and certainly someone who believes in a creator or a divine intelligence behind the phenomenon of the universe. That's very important. I think if you're atheistic, you wouldn't really find a great deal of empathy with what we do. So many of the same things that other Masonic orders are looking for, we look for the same, but I think you also have to be much more mystical to enjoy what we do and how we approach Masonry.
Why 21 though?
I think that's a traditional age that people say. I mean, the 21 is a sort of special number in Freemasonry anyway.
Oh, okay.
But in our constitution, I think one of the reasons we say 21 is because the person has lived for 3 times 7 years. There is that, but also they're mature enough to stand on their own 2 feet and make a decision as a free individual that they want to commit to a Masonic pathway as an adult. I think before then, it's fair to say that perhaps people are a bit too young. They're still studying.
Yeah, 13.
Trying to go about life. To suddenly commit to a lodge at 13 is a bit much. I think things like the Demole organisations are very good for young people who are interested in that. If it's a family thing, but I think for committing as an individual to a Masonic path, 21's very young, but young enough.
Yeah, very true. No, but how would you go? Obviously, age is obvious, but how would you go about, shall we say, assessing these qualities? Would it be a series of interviews, or would it?
Yes, we do a series of interviews. Obviously, if somebody's recommended, that makes things a little easier, because then we know that somebody who's already a member of the order, who's connected to the order, knows that this person has the right kinds of interests and approach towards these things that will be compatible with us. But we do interview and we ask questions such as what kinds of books do you read, what kinds of authors you're into, what kinds of areas of this particular form of study have you investigated, and what attracts you to our order in particular. And generally speaking, those questions give us the kinds of answers we're looking for.
Yeah, you're not just going to admit like anybody who just walks up to the door and asks for me.
I think that would be. I mean, we want everybody to have access to this if they're ready for it. But that readiness, when we say that someone has to be free and of good report, there's more than just the symbolic meaning to that. There's the fact that people have to be free mentally, they have to be free financially to be able to do it, and they have to be free, I think, philosophically. They have to feel that they're ready to investigate these things in the way that we do, and are available to commit to it. So that's something that we really are looking for.
Yeah, because the organization's very esoteric that way. There is a lot of esoteric knowledge. Yeah, and you have to be ready to take that aboard.
Absolutely.
Now let's hear from my friend and brother Dylan John Callahan from the Knights of Pythias. You may recall him. He's been here on Points of Light Radio at least twice that I remember, maybe more. And let's see who he feels is the ideal candidate for the Knights of Pythias.
I really love the way you phrase this question. What is the ideal candidate for the Knights of Pythias? You didn't ask what's the perfect candidate, and that's an important distinction because there is no perfect candidate, right? We don't claim or expect perfection, but our hope is for better things. So this is super relevant, especially for my local Knights of Pythias Lodge. We're trying to figure out what questions do you ask of a candidate, what do you want their answers to be, that kind of thing. So certainly you want the candidate to be able to bring something to the table. Are they going to benefit the order? Are they going to benefit our lodge by having them as a member? And also, are they going to be able to actually learn from the ranks? Are they going to learn the lessons of the three ranks? And then how are they going to apply those in their own life and moving forward? So, we'll ask, hey, how are things at work? How are things at home? You got a pretty good stable job and home life situation. That's all good. But the main takeaway is, are we going to actually be helping them in their life? And are they going to be adding something back? Are they going to be able to give back after that point? So I think that's the number one thing that you look for. After that, everybody's different. Everybody has different goals in life. As long as we can come together at some level playing field and really play off each other's strengths and then support each other in our weaknesses, that's the main point of looking for the ideal candidate.
The next opinion we'll be seeking comes from my new friend and brother, Tommy Schroeder. He's the Sentinel of the Abaca Grotto in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Not the first time you've seen him here before, brothers and sisters, and just be warned, won't be the last. But we're going to see who he feels is the ideal candidate for the grotto. Now, I do know, like you said, you were in the grotto. What would you look for in the ideal candidate for something like the grotto?
A master, well, he would definitely have to be a master mason in good standing. That's pretty much the only requirement for being a grotto. And I guess he would like to have fun and have a good time.
Okay, yeah, exactly. And he'd have to really have the time to pursue it because...
Well, yeah, time and money, although grotto dues aren't that expensive at all, but but he has to be able to pay both his, Blue Lodge dues and his grotto dues, essentially.
Wow. A lot of food for thought there, wasn't there, brothers and sisters? Right? Did you learn anything? I know I personally did. Right? The ideal candidate. Well, let's go back to the scriptures that we started out with. Now, for all intents and purposes, Saul looked like a king. He really did, right? But he didn't work out. And if you read further in the book of Samuel, the first Samuel, you will see that, Saul had huge character and spiritual flaws that would lead to some very bad decision making on his part, right? And they would also lead to his, and as well as his son's death, right? Terrible, terrible. Now, David didn't look the part. Like I said, probably still in puberty, right? And he really looked anything but a king. Don't forget, he was a shepherd. He was literally called in from watching the sheep when Samuel met him. But, he would have the kind of character that would turn out to be so good. His spiritual and his character, his spiritual and his character qualities would be so good that he would be remembered as, in Scripture, as a man after God's own heart. Think about that, right? It's such a good king, right? Now, when the apostles were looking to the disciples, to fill some of their administrative and logistics duties, right, and housekeeping duties, they didn't just look to anybody. And they also allowed those who weren't even apostles to put the 7 names forward. And they did such a good job with those names that one of those 7 disciples that were chosen for those administrative duties was a man named Stephen. And if you read forward in the book of Acts, he was so dedicated to the apostles' doctrine and cause that he would become the very first martyr of the New Testament. And that says something. But how do our guests feel? Right? First of all, Mr. Schroeder felt that the ideal candidate for the grotto needed to be, of course, a master mason, but also someone who likes to have a good time. You can't have people that are kind of stuffed shirts, right? Nerdy types going into an organization like the grotto. It's made for people, as I've heard it said, that it's made for masons who want to let their hair down a little bit. I kind of get that, right? Mr. Shear and Mr. Elday and Mr. Rose as well were members of much deeper and more esoteric organizations. And they felt that a much more intense line of questioning and maybe even multiple preliminary meetings with potential candidates were on order, right? There's the spiritual aspects of a candidate's character needed to be, shall we say, a little more ascertained. They needed to know that potential candidates were comfortable around those who of different faiths than they were. And of course, in the case of co-masonry with Mr. Rose, he wanted to see if a potential member would be comfortable sitting in the lodge with those who weren't of the same gender. Okay? Not everybody fits in a mixed lodge, right? And not everybody, for that matter, wants to go to a male-only or female-only lodge. That's understandable, right? But I will say this on a personal level. When I first entered fraternal circles in 2005, the big thing I heard from some of the organizations was that they wanted keepers. In other words, people who knew that the organization knew would be with them for the long term. However, if you listen to Brother Callahan, he wanted to know not just about the long-term commitment, but also what the candidate believed they had to give as well as receive from the Knights of Pythias. And that is understandable, right? One of the questions, you're hearing now is, what fraternal bodies do you belong to? Or what things interest you? That's part of also what you expect to give or receive. They want to know what you can give back. What are your qualities? Are your organizational skills good? Right? Going forward, right? that might benefit a lodge. Do you like to cook? Like they'll even ask you things like that. What skills do you have? If you are someone who, like myself, quite obviously enjoys cooking, yeah, that could benefit someone. When you're helping prepare lunches and fundraising dinners and so on like that. That's good. You need people like that, right? And you want to know if a candidate has time to attend the meetings. Brother Callahan asked, that's part of one of the things they want to know that you can contribute. Can you contribute your time to an organization? Right? I personally feel that time usually tells on a potential candidate if they're willing to wait to get in, for one thing. The other thing is sometimes they do get in and they just don't like the organization. It just doesn't feel like it's for them, or their situation changes, right? We need to be patient there as well. People move, their work schedules are not always the perfect 9 to 5, weekends off type things. That's just not how everybody works. But, we never stop searching or give up the search for candidates, right? We really don't. And one thing we have to remember is that our lodges and fraternal orders are really families. And when we are interviewing or assessing a potential candidate, remember that we are assessing their suitability for our families, right? For these families that we belong to, right? And I'll leave it there. I want to thank the guests that we contributed to this segment, and of course you, the listener and viewer, for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this. Before I go, I want to remind you, as always, that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. I want to hear some input on what you feel is the ideal candidate today. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel. You can see the link to the PayPal link in this segment. You can give a voluntary contribution to this podcast. We will use the funds raised there to move the podcast forward. You can also see the link to my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, it's been a pleasure fellowshipping with you and carrying out this discussion today. Until we meet again, just step into the light.